It was 3 a.m., my wedding ring felt like a noose, and the police knock shattered my world. But before I tell you about those two officers standing on my doorstep with their practiced sympathy and carefully chosen words, I need you to understand what I thought I had, what I believed with every fiber of my being, what I would have staked my life on just 24 hours earlier. Because the contrast, the sickening, violent whiplash between who I thought my husband was and who he actually turned out to be, that's the story. That's what keeps me awake at night, 4 months later, still wondering how I could have been so catastrophically, pathetically blind. Let me take you back. Thursday evening. Our anniversary, 4 years married, 6 years together. I'd planned everything perfectly. His favorite meal, beef Wellington, Julia Child's recipe, which I'd practiced 3 times to get right, the expensive Barolo he loved but never splurged on, candles casting amber light across our dining room table. I'd even bought new lingerie. Ridiculous, maybe, for a married couple approaching their mid-30s, but Marcus always made me feel like we were still in that butterflies and breathlessness phase. That was his gift, I realize now. Making me feel special was his craft. The dinner I cooked went cold, just like our vows felt now. He was supposed to be home by 7. Traffic, he'd texted at 6:45. Client ran long. Love you, can't wait. By 8, the candles had burned down to stubs. By 9, my calls went straight to voicemail. By 10, I was pacing our living room, the one we decorated together from IKEA catalogs and Pinterest boards, convinced something terrible had happened. An accident. A medical emergency. Something that would explain why Marcus Chen, the man who never forgot a date, who sent me flowers on random Tuesdays, who still held my hand during movies, would miss our anniversary without a word. Have you ever waited up all night, heart racing? The anxiety is its own kind of torture. You're caught between imagining the worst and bargaining with the universe. You check your phone every 30 seconds even though you know there's no notification. You rehearse the relieved laughter you'll share when he walks through the door with some perfectly reasonable explanation. I called his best friend, Tyler. No answer. I called his office, closed obviously at 11 p.m. I called my mother, who told me not to panic, that men sometimes lose track of time, that I should try to sleep. Sleep. As if our home felt different that night. The same exposed brick walls in our Minneapolis loft. The same mid-century furniture we'd hunted for at estate sales. The same framed photos of our wedding day, our honeymoon in Greece, the trip to Tokyo we'd saved for 2 years to afford. But the silence had weight. The shadows seemed to lean in closer. Why would a devoted husband vanish? The answer hid in his locked drawer. I didn't snoop. Not then. Despite the terror crawling up my spine, I still trusted him. I still believed there was an explanation that would make everything okay. That's how deep in I was. That's how completely he had me convinced. Instead, I curled up on the couch with my phone clutched to my chest, drifting in and out of a restless half-sleep, jerking awake every few minutes to check for missed calls. Nothing. 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 Then at 3:17 a.m., the timestamp seared into my memory, the knock came. 2 officers, a man and a woman, their faces arranged into that neutral expression they must teach at the academy, the one that says we have bad news but we're trained not to react. Mrs. Chen? Yes, that's me. Is Marcus, did something happen? Is he okay? The female officer, Officer Delgado, her badge said, glanced at her partner before answering. Your husband is alive, ma'am. He's currently in custody at the downtown precinct. Custody. The word didn't compute. Custody was for criminals. Custody was for people who had done something wrong. Marcus was a financial consultant. He wore fitted suits and donated to charity and cried at Pixar movies. There must be a mistake, I heard myself say. Marcus wouldn't, he couldn't, what is he being held for? Another exchanged glance. Something passed between them that I couldn't read. We're not at liberty to discuss the details of the investigation at this time, Officer Delgado said carefully, but we'd like you to come to the station. There are some questions we need to ask, and Detective Morrison thought you might want to see your husband. Questions? What kind of questions? About your husband's whereabouts this evening, his financial activities, his personal life. The phrase hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. I followed them in my own car, still wearing the dress I'd put on for our anniversary dinner, mascara smudged from rubbing my eyes, mind spinning through possibilities that grew darker with each passing mile. Fraud, embezzlement, an affair gone wrong, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover. Because the police didn't tell me everything that night. They couldn't. The full scope of Marcus's deception was still being unraveled, thread by sickening thread. And his real motive? The truth behind the man I'd married? That would destroy me. The cop said accident, but his secret emails screamed betrayal louder than any siren. Here's what they told me at the station. Marcus had been involved in a single car collision on Highway 36, about 40 miles outside the city. He'd been driving toward Wisconsin, alone, at nearly 90 miles per hour when he lost control and hit a guardrail. Minor injuries. Incredibly lucky, they said. Could have been fatal. But here's what didn't add up. Why was my husband speeding away from Minneapolis on our anniversary night? Why was his car packed with 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and $10,000 in cash? We're investigating the circumstances, Detective Morrison told me, his tone suggesting there was far more he wasn't saying. Your husband isn't being very cooperative. We were hoping you might have some insight. Insight into my own husband. The man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years. I had nothing. Absolutely nothing. And that realization, the dawning horror that I might not know Marcus at all, was almost worse than his absence. They let me see him briefly. Through glass, he looked wrong. Not injured despite the accident, but hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out the man I married and left behind a shell wearing his face. Marcus, I said through the phone receiver, pressing my hand against the partition. What's happening? What did you do? He stared at me for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry, Emma, I'm so sorry. Not an explanation, just an apology, and something in his eyes, guilt, fear, relief, that made my stomach turn. They wouldn't release him. Something about flight risk and ongoing investigation. I drove home alone as the sun rose, the Minneapolis skyline turning gold and pink while my entire world collapsed to gray. From loving wife to detective in one password crack. I didn't plan to snoop, but sitting in our empty apartment, surrounded by the debris of our failed anniversary dinner, I realized I had no choice. The police weren't telling me everything. Marcus wasn't talking. The only answers I'd find were the ones I uncovered myself. His home office was locked. It had always been locked. Client confidentiality, he'd explained, and I'd never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted him. The key was on his keyring, which the police had returned to me along with his wallet and phone. The phone was dead, password protected anyway. But the office was a revelation. Reddit fam ever snooped and regretted it. My find changed everything, stay for the twist. The first thing I noticed was the filing cabinet, hidden behind a bookshelf which I'd always assumed was purely decorative. Inside, folders organized by year dating back to before we'd even met. Financial documents, bank statements, but not from accounts I recognized. Marcus made good money, or so I'd believed. We talked about finances openly, shared a joint account, split expenses fairly. He'd shown me his paychecks, his investment portfolio, his retirement projections. But these statements told a different story. Accounts in his name alone, transfers of large sums, 20,000 here, 50,000 there, to recipients I'd never heard of. Withdrawals of cash that dwarfed what we spent on our daily lives. Where was this money going? I opened his laptop next. Dead battery, but I found the charger. Password screen. I tried our anniversary, nothing. His birthday, my birthday, our address. Then, on a hunch, the name of his childhood dog, which he'd mentioned exactly once years ago. Biscuit, the desktop loaded, emails, hundreds of them, thousands, organized into folders with innocuous labels. Clients, personal, archive. But one folder was labeled simply M. I clicked it, and I found her. Messages spanning years, intimate, loving. The kind of words Marcus used to say to me before things got comfortable, before I stopped being the center of his attention. I miss you, I'll be there this weekend. The plan is working, she doesn't suspect anything. Kiss the baby for me, I'll be home soon. The baby, what if the man I married wasn't even his real name? I scrolled faster, my vision blurring with tears. Photos, so many photos. Marcus with a woman I'd never seen, dark-haired, beautiful, younger than me, holding a toddler with his exact eyes. His exact eyes. There was a birth certificate in the email attachments. A little girl named Sophie Chen. Born 3 years ago. Father, Marcus Chen. Mother, Victoria Reyes. 3 years ago, we'd been married for 4. The room spun. I made it to the bathroom just in time to vomit, kneeling on the cold tile floor while my entire reality restructured itself around this impossible truth. Marcus had a child, a secret daughter, a secret family. And I was just, what? A cover story, a convenient alibi, a source of income while he built his real life somewhere else. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because hidden in those email folders, beneath the love letters and family photos, I found something else. Financial projections, detailed breakdowns of my family's business, the textile company my parents had built over 30 years. Valuations, debt analysis, vulnerability assessments. Marcus had never worked with my family professionally. They'd never even discussed business. My father respected boundaries. Marcus preferred to keep things separate. So why did my husband have a comprehensive financial profile of my family's company in his secret files? The answer was in the most recent email, sent just 2 days before his accident. Phase 3 complete, I have access to everything. Initiate transfer Tuesday, I'll be gone before she knows what happened. Before she knows, before I knew, I was still clutching my phone, still kneeling on the bathroom floor when it rang. Detective Morrison. Mrs. Chen, we need you to come back to the station. Your husband is ready to talk, and I think you're going to want to hear what he has to say. Face to face in that cold room, his words cut deeper than any knife. You were just a mark. The interrogation room was exactly what you'd expect from crime shows: gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table with scratches that told stories I didn't want to imagine. But I wasn't there to be interrogated. I was there to watch my husband confess. They'd set up a monitor in an adjacent room. Detective Morrison sat beside me while Marcus spoke to his lawyer on camera, apparently waiving rights I didn't understand, explaining decisions I couldn't fathom. I want to tell her the truth, Marcus said, and for a moment I almost believed he felt remorse. She deserves to know. His lies unraveled, pulling me into the abyss with them. The story he told took 2 hours. His name really was Marcus Chen, that much was true. But almost everything else about the man I'd married was constructed, fabricated, designed specifically to appeal to me. We'd met at a friend's party 6 years ago, romantic, spontaneous, or so I'd thought. But Marcus had engineered that meeting. He'd researched me beforehand, knew my hobbies, my preferences, my vulnerabilities, knew that I'd just ended a relationship with someone who'd cheated on me, knew that I was the only heir to Chen Textiles, my family's successful manufacturing business. Your father turned down my initial proposal for an investment partnership, Marcus explained, his voice infuriatingly calm. He said he didn't work with outsiders, so I became an insider. He'd spent months crafting his approach, becoming exactly what I needed at exactly the right moment. A shoulder to cry on, a patient listener, a man who seemed to understand my trust issues because he'd been hurt too. Every conversation we'd ever had replayed in my mind, recontextualized. Every tender moment, every vulnerability I'd shared, he'd filed it all away, using it to dig deeper into my life. When did you start stealing from my family? I asked through the speaker they'd set up for questions. My voice sounded alien, dead. About 18 months into our marriage, he answered without hesitation. Your father added me to certain accounts for estate planning purposes. I gained incremental access from there. Shell companies, offshore transfers, nothing that would trigger immediate alarms. How much? A pause. In total, just over $2 million. The room tilted. $2 million, my family's legacy, my father's life's work. And Victoria, Sophie, were they part of the plan too? For the first time, something human flickered across Marcus's face. Victoria was a complication. We met after I married you. She didn't know about the con. She thought I was a businessman with a complicated divorce situation. She thought I loved her. Did you? I loved the idea of her. A real life, a real family, something that wasn't built on lies. He laughed bitterly. Ironic, right? I lied to her too. If this betrayal hits home, like in Theorize, what's his endgame? But I wasn't done. There was still the accident, the suitcases, the $10,000 in cash. You were running, I said. On our anniversary, you were leaving. The transfers were scheduled for Tuesday. I was supposed to disappear over the weekend, create confusion, buy time for the money to clear international channels. The accident was unplanned. Unplanned? You expect me to believe you crashed your car by accident while fleeing the country? Another hesitation. Then, I was being followed. I panicked. Someone else knows about the money, Emma, someone who wants it for themselves. That's why I crashed. I was trying to lose them. Detective Morrison paused the feed, turning to me with an expression I couldn't read. There's more, Mrs. Chen, things your husband hasn't admitted yet, things we discovered during our investigation that he may not even know we know. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a marriage certificate. Victoria Reyes and Marcus Chen, dated 2 years ago. They're legally married, Morrison said quietly, which means your marriage. But the real shocker, our wedding wasn't legal. The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Marcus had married Victoria while still married to me, but there was more, because our marriage license, the one I'd watched him sign on that perfect August day, had been filed with fraudulent information. A previous marriage he'd never disclosed, a divorce that had never been finalized. I had never been Marcus Chen's wife. Not legally. Not really. The woman he'd built a life with, stolen from, planned a future around, I was nothing but a role I'd auditioned for without knowing there was a script. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and phone calls with my devastated parents. My father, who had trusted Marcus implicitly, who had welcomed him into our family business, who had amended his will to include his son-in-law, he collapsed when he learned the truth. Literally collapsed. Heart attack brought on by stress. He survived, barely. The news broke 3 days later. Financial press first, then local outlets, then national. Family business defrauded by con artist husband. My face was everywhere, our wedding photos, my humiliation served up for public consumption. Comment sections filled with speculation, some sympathetic, many cruel. How could she not know? They asked. She must have been in on it. Gold digger meets gold digger. I stopped reading after the first 100. Marcus was held without bail, the flight risk obvious. Victoria came forward, equally devastated, equally deceived. We spoke once, 2 women comparing notes on the same man's lies, finding no comfort in our shared victimhood. But the full truth still hadn't emerged, because Marcus wasn't just a con artist. He wasn't just a bigamist. He wasn't just a thief. He was also being hunted. And the people hunting him were about to find me instead. He thought he'd break me. I turned his secrets into my superpower. The men showed up 2 weeks after Marcus's arrest. They came to my parents' house, where I'd been staying while trying to piece together some semblance of a life. Professional, polite, terrifying in their politeness. Mrs. Chen, the taller one said, though I wasn't Mrs. Chen, had never legally been Mrs. Chen. We represent certain parties interested in assets your husband misappropriated. We understand this situation is difficult, but we need to discuss restitution. These weren't police. They weren't lawyers either. They were fixers for someone Marcus had stolen from before me, before Victoria, before any of us. Someone who had been tracking his grifts across years and finally caught up with him. The money Marcus had taken from my family, it wasn't his first score. It wasn't even his biggest. He'd been running this con, the charming husband, the trusted insider, the methodical thief for over a decade. Different names, different marks, different cities. I was just the latest victim in a very long line, but I was also the first one to fight back. The empty home now echoes with my victory, not his absence. The decision crystallized in my father's hospital room, watching him sleep with machines monitoring his fragile heart. Marcus had nearly killed him, not with his hands, but with his betrayal. He had taken so much from my family, from Victoria, from the other women I'd eventually track down and contact. He thought he could operate in shadows forever. I decided to drag him into the light. Working with Detective Morrison and a team of federal investigators who had been building a case against Marcus for years, I became an active participant in his destruction. I provided every document I'd found. I testified before grand juries. I connected the dots between his various identities, his various victims, his various crimes, but I didn't stop there. I went public, not as a victim begging for sympathy, as a survivor demanding accountability. A press conference first, standing beside my mother with cameras flashing, telling our story without shame or apology. Yes, I'd been deceived. Yes, I'd trusted the wrong person. But that didn't make me stupid. It made me human. And it made Marcus Chen, or whatever his real name was, a predator who had specifically targeted my humanity. The response was overwhelming. Other victims came forward. Women from Portland, from Denver, from Atlanta, each with a similar story. Each having believed she'd found the love of her life, only to discover she'd been cast in a con. We formed a support group, then an advocacy organization, then a movement. Subscribe for more heart-wrenching tales, share if you've overcome betrayal. Marcus was eventually convicted on 47 counts across multiple jurisdictions: wire fraud, identity theft, bigamy, grand larceny. The sentences stacked to over 25 years, meaning he would spend most of his remaining life in prison. Victoria and I split the recovery from his seized assets, not much, given how thoroughly he'd hidden the money, but something. Enough for her to start over with Sophie. Enough for me to pay for my father's medical bills and invest in therapy I desperately needed. The men who'd shown up at my parents' house never returned. Whatever debts Marcus owed them apparently weren't worth pursuing once he was behind bars, or maybe they found what they were looking for somewhere else. I decided not to investigate too closely. Some shadows are better left unexplored. What became of his other life? Justice hit hard. Sophie will grow up knowing her father is a convicted criminal. Victoria is rebuilding in Texas, close to her family, away from the memories of a marriage that never should have been. They're okay. Not great, but okay. Getting better, and me? I spent the first 6 months after the trial in what I can only describe as grief. Not for Marcus, I hope he rots, but for the woman I used to be. The trusting, hopeful, romantic woman who believed in soulmates and second chances and the fundamental goodness of people. She died the night Marcus didn't come home. But someone new is growing in her place. I'm 35 now. Single intentionally while I figure out who I am without a partner defining me. Working at my family's business, not as the heir apparent, but as someone who's earned her place through crisis management and public relations nightmares. My father is recovering. My mother is stronger than ever. Our company survived, damaged but not destroyed. The ring I wore, the noose I thought would choke me, I had it melted down. The gold became a pendant I wear around my neck now. Not a reminder of Marcus, but of what I survived, what I overcame, what I refused to let break me. If you're watching this, listening to this, you might be in the middle of your own betrayal story. You might be wondering if you'll ever trust again, love again, feel whole again. Here's what I know, you will, not the same way, not as easily, but you will. The people who hurt us don't get to define us. They don't get to write our endings. They are chapters we survive, learn from, and eventually close. Marcus thought he could steal my life, my money, my identity, my future. Instead, he gave me something unexpected: clarity, purpose. The knowledge that I am stronger, smarter, and more resilient than any con artist who crosses my path. What would you do if your forever was a lie? I'll tell you what I did. I made a new forever, on my own terms, built on truth instead of deception, on self-knowledge instead of naive trust. The apartment I shared with Marcus is long gone. I live alone now in a place I chose myself, decorated with things that bring me joy. No ghosts, no reminders, just possibility. Some nights I still wake up reaching for someone who isn't there. Old habits, old wounds, but the ache fades faster now. The anger softens into something almost like indifference. He's in prison, I'm free. That's the only ending this story needs. If this story hit home, comment your own experiences below. Share with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And remember, survival isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about refusing to let it be the last word. This is Emma Chen, or whatever I decide to call myself next, signing off. Stay strong.